Again, thank you all for coming to the last lecture this year of the Provost Forum on the Public University and the Social Good. Today, we take a closer look at that university system, its role on the institute for social good in an international context. And without further ado, I will turn the podium over to the Provost himself.
Thank you. And I actually think I will use the podium. So, good afternoon. I want to welcome you to the 6th event in the series, the Provost Forum on the Public University and the Social Good. We're extremely pleased to have as our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Allan Goodman, President and CEO of the Institute of International Education. He will speak on the topic, From Mandalay to Memorial Union, How Public Universities Keep Dreams Alive. As those of you who've been attending the Provost Forums this academic year know, we've had many insightful presentations on the public university in our own country. Topics receiving special emphasis have ranged from budgetary challenges to public universities' public service mission to the so-called corporatization of higher education and neoliberalism. Our last forum, featuring Professor Carlos Enrique de Brito Cruz, broadened our perspective in a crucial way by focusing on public universities in his home country of Brazil. Dr. Brito Cruz helped us to understand public higher education in California more deeply and inspired us to learn from a Brazilian model developed by the state of Sao Paulo. Today's forum promises to be an excellent follow-up to our last one, in the sense that Dr. Goodman too will provide an international perspective. His distinguished career as an academic leader uniquely qualifies him to do this. I can't do justice to his resume here, and Bill Lacey will speak more about Dr. Goodman's accomplishments in a moment, but I do want to note that in addition to his current position as President and CEO of the IIE, he has been Executive Dean of the School of Foreign Service and Professor at Georgetown University, as well as a consultant to the Ford Foundation, the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation, the United States Information Agency, and IBM. The very difficult period surrounding November 18th, 2011 on our campus gave greater urgency to two questions that were already the subject of spirited dialogue and debate on the UC Davis campus. What should the University of California, or any public university, be in the 21st century? And what can it be? In response, the Office of the Chancellor and the Office of the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor quickly committed to facilitating an inclusive and productive dialogue on the future of the public university. As part of this commitment, the two offices have established a web page residing on my website in support of lectures, panels, forums, and other campus events designed by or offered for the benefit of the UC Davis community. In addition, as a complement to these campus events, my office established the Provost Forum on the Public University and the Social Good. This focused scholarly series is aimed at furthering awareness and dialogue on this important topic within and beyond the university community. It's also aimed at exploring the potential to make UC Davis a center for the study of the role of the public university in contemporary society. This academic year, the series features 7 public presentations by experts in a variety of fields, plus associated events. The presentations are overseen by my office in cooperation with the university's Center for Regional Change. To learn more about these Provost Forums, I invite you to consult the Future of the University page on my website. There you'll find a complete calendar of the 7 lectures scheduled for 2012-13, information and supplementary materials for each event, and videos of past events. You'll also find my opening remarks for the inaugural forum held in October 2012, which addresses the task before us as we attempt properly to envision the public university for the 21st century. For making today's event possible, the following individuals and groups deserve thanks. First and foremost, Dr. Allan Goodman, who has traveled from New York City via San Francisco to be with us today. Next, our Oversight Committee for arranging this and the other forums for 2012-13 academic year. The committee's members are Martin Kenny, David Campbell, Jonathan London, Luis Eduardo Guarnizo, and Program Manager Alicia Thompson. The co-sponsors with my office of today's event, University Outreach and International Programs, the Center for Regional Change, and the Community and Regional Development Program. Vice Provost of University Outreach and International Programs, Bill Lacey, for inviting Dr. Goodman to speak and for serving as today's moderator. And finally, to all of you for being here today. Your participation in the forums and your sharing the ideas presented in them with others is a key mechanism by which the series will help us identify and clarify issues facing public higher education and ultimately developing effective solutions. As I step away, I'll remind you that you're all invited to stay for the reception on the patio immediately following today's presentation. And now I yield the podium to Vice Provost Lacey.
Thank you, Ralph. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome my colleague and my friend, Dr. Allan Goodman, the 6th president of the International Institute for Education. And it's really a pleasure to have him join us today to give us the final lecture of this very important series on the public university and the social good. As you probably know, the Institute is the leading not-for-profit organization in the field of international educational exchange and development training. Among other endeavors, IIE administers the Fulbright program, the Humphrey program, and has sponsored numerous other programs, over 250 corporate, government, and privately sponsored programs. UC Davis, as many of you know, is one of the only 18 universities that host the Humphrey program in the United States, and the only university in the state of California that hosts the Humphrey program. UC Davis also is first this year, tied among research universities as the top producer of U.S. Fulbright scholars in 2012 and 13. Another key activity, one we shouldn't overlook and is particularly important today, is the effort by IIE, starting in 1919, to rescue scholars threatened by war, by terrorism, by repression. They've rescued scholars beginning in 1919 from the former Soviet Union, Russia, from Spain during that civil war, during the Nazi occupation and rule in Germany, more recently in Iraq, and most recently in Syria. And today, under Dr. Keith Walkenpaugh's leadership as director of the Human Rights Institute here at Davis, we had a 2-hour panel session on some of the tragedies that are occurring in Syria, particularly the impacts it's having on their universities and their future direction in terms of human capital development. So a very important function that the IIE has played over that long period of time. Actually, Dr. Goodman has brought along a few brochures. If you're interested in these particular activities, this is the Scholar Rescue Fund that the IIE runs. This is a larger brochure that talks about the IIE Scholar Rescue Fund, the rescue of science and learning. Dr. Goodman's history is impressive. As you've already heard a bit about his background, he actually has served as the executive dean of the School of Foreign Service and the professor of Georgetown University, but he's authored numerous books published in international affairs by Harvard, Princeton, Yale University presses. Dr. Goodman served as the presidential briefing coordinator for the director of the Central Intelligence Agency under the Carter administration. Subsequently, he was the first American professor to lecture at the Foreign Affairs College of Beijing, helped create the first U.S. academic exchange program with the Moscow Diplomatic Academy for the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, and developed the diplomatic training program for the Foreign Ministry of Vietnam. Dr. Goodman is also a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, a founding member of the World Innovation Summit of Education, the WISE program in Qatar, a program that he and I participated in a couple of years ago together, bringing together leaders of higher education, well, actually K through higher education, and IIE has played a major role in that activity in the Middle East. He's also the co-president of the Partner University Fund, Grant Review Committee, and a member of the Thomas R. Pickering Foreign Affairs Fellowship Program. He also serves as the Council of Higher Education Accreditation International Quality Group Advisory Council. And I could go on and on. I don't want to embarrass Dr. Goodman with so many of his fine accomplishments. Dr. Goodman has a PhD in government from Harvard, an MBA, and an MPA from the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and a BS from Northwestern University. He also holds honorary degrees from numerous universities and has received awards from Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, South Florida, Tufts University, and the Legion of Honor from France. And I'm particularly interested in that one since my daughter has just moved to France and Paris about 3 weeks ago. I want to learn more about that particular award. I've heard that this is one of their most distinguished awards that the French government can provide. So please join me today in welcoming Dr. Goodman, whose talk is entitled, From Mandalay to Memorial Union, How Public Universities Keep Dreams Alive. Dr. Goodman.
Thanks so much. As all of you know here, anytime Bill Lacey calls, you do what he says. And so it was real easy to say yes to this forum. I'm really honored to be with the provost. Your chancellor serves on our advisory board. We value Linda's advice, and she's been a loyal supporter of Fulbright for a very long time. I was a little concerned when I got the material for the trip in two respects. One, my air transportation was a round-trip ticket. I really like it here. And you are living in a wonderful place with a terrific university and town surrounding. And when I read the provost's CV, it was clear it really wasn't the complete pictures because it said absolutely nothing about his ability to milk cows. I'm sure that will be in the paper soon. We have a number of Fulbright scholars and students and alumni in the audience. The Institute is honored to administer that program on behalf of the Department of State. I wonder if they might just stand and say, alumni, current Fulbrighter, and where you're from. So we'll start in Cameroon.
University of Goya. I lectured in the University of Goya for about 17 years and undertaking a Fulbright fellowship in the California Academy of Sciences. So I'm happy to be here today.
Welcome.
Yes, I'm Yusuf from Yonsei University, South Korea. I'm at the Department of Political Science. Currently, I'm at the Department of Political Science in Seoul.
Wakbek Mutabek from Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia. I am from Kyrgyz State Technical University. Now I'm in UC Berkeley, Safe Transportation Research and Education Center.
I'm Hamza. I am from Egypt and I'm from Cairo University and I'm here at UC Davis at the Math.
I'm Luis Banauskas. I'm from Lithuanian Institute of History, so I'm from Vilnius. So here I'm at UC Berkeley at the Institute of Slavic, Eurasian, and Eastern European Studies.
Hi, I'm Angela Canovas from Barcelona, Spain. I'm doing my postdoc here in UC Davis in Animal Science in Animal Genetics and Genomics department.
Hi, my name is Marco de la Riza. I am from Uruguay. I work in my country in the National Institute for Agricultural Research, and I am here in the Plant Science Department of Davis.
Hi, my name is Mariana. I'm from Brazil, and I'm here at UC Davis in the Department of Animal Science, working with animal nutrition.
I'm Sergei. I'm from Ukraine, from the International Technical University, and here in UC Davis, Department of Computer Science.
Survive.
I'm a Fulbright alum. Back in 1986, I spent a year as a Fulbright scholar at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, a real scientist.
I'm a Fulbright alum in the administration program. I went to Brazil in 2000 and Japan in 2011.
Larry, I'm I guess an alum. I had a Fulbright to Israel in 1963. Anybody here older than that? So, and I enjoyed that experience greatly, and delighted to be here with so many people. I guess I'd like to know more about it.
I'm Mark Schenker. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Outreach and Engagement at UC Davis, and I'm a double Fulbright alum in France and most recently in Colombia.
I'm Wesley Young, Fulbright alumni. I was in South Korea in 2009.
Currently I'm Scholarship Fund Fellow in UCI, and last year I was Humphrey Fellow in Pittsburgh.
I'm Keith David Wattenpond,
Syria.
Syria. And I'm Keith David Wattenpond, Director of the Human Rights Initiative, and I was a Fulbright Fellow from UCLA and also a Fulbright Hayes Fellow from UCLA, both to Syria.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Fricke. I'm a Human Rights Consultant, and I was a Fulbright Fellow from Yale to Damascus, Syria.
Well, congratulations all. And a special thanks to this campus for the way it reaches out and welcomes Fulbrighters and Humphrey Fellows, the receptions that you give during the year to recognize the students and the alumni really matters. Now, I have bad news and good news about my talk. I asked my staff what they thought of it, and they said, you have to be crazy to think that you're going to give this lecture. And I said, why? I wrote it about a month ago. I really enjoyed writing it. And they said, but what are you thinking? It's 9 pages long, single-spaced. Bill has a copy of my text. I don't propose to read it, but I'd really like to share a few observations with you about the topic, about my visit here at Davis today, and then engage in a question and answer dialogue if we can. I was privileged earlier this morning to participate in your third spring symposium on human rights that Keith Wattenpaw and Adrian and Amal from Syria spoke at and Keith organized. The topic was what was happening in Syria and why scholars and students and educational institutions attacked. And this is very much central to the work that we do. We are currently trying to rescue Syrian scholars and Syrian students in the midst of that civil war. And as Bill mentioned, our commitment to scholar rescue goes back a very long time, in fact, to our founding. The problem is the only thing that we know how to do is rescue. We've never really gotten in front of trying to deter or prevent attacks. And what so impressed me about my campus visit today and what was happening this morning is you have a minor now in human rights. You have a human rights initiative. And if we have any hope of figuring out and thinking through how we will deter attacks on scholars, on students, on educational institutions, it's going to be Keith's program and this university and thinkers gathered here that help us get in front of the problem. To give you some metrics, from 1920 to the year 2000, we've rescued about 20,000 scholars. The 400 we rescued from the Nazis, 4 of them won Nobel Prizes in science and literature. So the lives that the fund helps to save are lives that may save all of us in the future. That was up to 2000. We then realized this was going to be a permanent activity of the Institute. We created an endowment which caused us to name it the Scholar Rescue Fund to do this work permanently. From 2002 to 2007, we had 980 requests for help from scholars from 100 countries. From 2008 to 2012, we had 3,000 requests for help. We don't know the size of the market. We don't know how large this activity of ours is going to have to be. But we do know it's the only fund in the world that helps scholars. There are plenty of funds and organizations that help poets and writers and journalists. But for some reason, the Academy has not taken care of the threats to its own. So we'll keep doing this rescue work, but I'm hoping that Keith and your program will put us out of business in this area, discovering how we can prevent those threats from materializing in the lives of these scholars. I also want to talk about a threat closer to home, which caused the provost and Bill to have this forum in the first place, and that really is the threat to our nations and our system of public universities. If you look at it from my vantage point, we're asking here and throughout America, public institutions to accept more students, educate more students, do more advanced research, fuel industry and entrepreneurship, and do it all at less and less cost in the midst of shrinking budgets. And the real threat, I think all of us on the outside worry about is, can we continue to do this, or what will turn it around so that legislatures and public sources of funding will say the first place we have to restore funding to are the public universities, and the last place we have to make the cuts are in the public universities, given all the things that we are asking your institutions to do. It hits home particularly hard in my work in the international education field, because increasingly I'm hearing abroad questions like, will the UC system survive? We've heard there are a lot of cuts. I wonder when it will show up in the league ranking tables, and when Davis and Berkeley will fall into a different tier, a different category. I haven't heard for most of my tenure those questions until the past couple of years, but the world is watching what happens to our public institutions, and the world that I inhabit thinks what's happening is an existential threat. Next week, I'll be in London to represent the United States at the G8, G20 Summit for Higher Education, which is alongside the official G8 Summit. We started these summits a few years ago. France was the first host, then America was last year, Britain is this year. I will hear 19 other presentations of ministers of education who will say that their governments in the midst of recession have doubled or tripled or substantially increased in some way public funding to higher education, for advanced research, for international scholarships. There is only one country in that group which cannot report a year of increase. And I've not been able to report a year of increase in public funding for US public institutions for a very long time in that forum. The world notices what's happening here, and it makes a difference. That said, this institution is so well known in the world. That's why my lecture text is 9 pages long, because we talk about Fulbright, Humphrey, the Brazil Science Mobility Program, the faculty, the students, the alumni. Your institution has a global footprint, and with it a global reputation. Bill just gave me his latest newsletter, and he was going through the pages with me. Here's Brazil, here's Humphrey, here's the top Fulbright producers. And he said, heck, this isn't my issue, this is your issue. This is about all the programs we do together. And what they mean by doing them together is all of the countries that participate in the programs that bring students to Davis, they know your reputation, they know your strengths, they know why they want to be here. And so part of the good news, I have to say, is that the world knows Davis. The world knows what attracts students and scholars here, even in the midst of the fiscal and other challenges to public universities, and this university, which I know it's not easy to make ends meet and budgets balance. So, you have now over 5,000 international students and scholars that come each year to Davis. I know there's an aspiration to increase that. I think it will be very well received globally. You have now one of the top producing schools of Fulbrights, period. 6 of your faculty are abroad on Fulbrights, 2 in highly competitive distinguished chairs, 1 in France and 1 in Sweden. Over 1,500 Aggies studied abroad last year, and thanks to your alumna and Pitzer, more will be able to do this because of the additional grants that will be made available. Why do people do this? Why do people come here? What does it say about this public institution? What we hear is that it's the diversity and excellence and the range of programs you have. A lot of schools are good in a few things. You're good in many things. You're good and excellent in areas and disciplines that matter not only to our country, but to the world we share. Because if we don't know how to milk cows, and we don't know how to grow stuff, and we don't know how to conserve water, and we don't teach it to the world, after a while the world is not going to have enough water and enough food and enough security in that area to feed itself. So your agricultural and science roots matter to the world. They attract people to these campuses. Now, I often hear the comparison, I wish I could go to Harvard. I often hear students say, I really would like to go to Harvard to study animal husbandry. Maybe get a degree in veterinary science, maybe do forestry. And of course, there are a few things Harvard just doesn't do. But you do it. And when I juxtapose Harvard and Davis, what I'm trying to suggest is that the world has a priority for the subjects you teach. And that's one reason that they want to come here. They associate Davis with excellence because Fulbright is highly competitive, Humphrey is highly competitive. And this helps your global footprint because you have so many here. And you've had a Humphrey program almost since the inception of the program. I think there are more than 300 alumni now of the Humphrey program that had their time in Davis. You have something, and it's a good thing that American institutions in general have it, that most of the world doesn't have. You really don't have corruption. Most of the world, you pay to get in the university, you pay your grades on your way out, you pay for your transcript, and sometimes you have to pay your professors even to show up. American public institutions, open, merit-based, with faculty that really teach, are rare in the rest of the world. And people realize when they're coming here, they're getting the real deal. And then we have academic freedom. You can't do advanced research, you can't do real teaching, you can't encourage critical thinking unless you have that. And many countries that may report substantial public investments in higher education in the month and weeks ahead are still struggling with academic freedom, something that we perhaps take for granted, but is the very bedrock of why universities like this one push the envelope, discover new forms of science and new forms of education. And I think those are the things that really endure and continue to make the United States and its public institutions a destination of choice for the best and brightest around the world. Now, there is competition, and competition with public institutions elsewhere. When we started the G8, G20, there was only a G5. America, Britain, France, Germany, and then a tie for 5th place between Canada and Australia as destination countries for leading international students. We had to expand to the G8 because there was a tie for 5th place, and suddenly China, which is the world's major sending country, became one of the world's major receiving countries. It's actually in 3rd place today, and it's not unlikely that China will surpass the United Kingdom, which has always been in 2nd place as a major destination country. So the dynamic of who is going where is changing, but the very forces and dynamics that cause people to come here and to America, I think are not going to change unless we are less excellent in the research that we do, unless academic freedom is attacked here as it has been attacked in so many other countries where, unfortunately, we have to rescue scholars. So we have the foundations that I think will enable your vision to succeed of having much more than 5,000 international students, if that's your wish. And it will enable this university to continue to recruit and attract students from the world that I work in. And it's a growing world. It's about 4.1 million international students today. The British Council thinks that number will grow to about 7 million by the end of this decade. I think it will exceed 10 million. And no other country has the capacity to receive international students that we do. Britain is at about 15%. Australia is about 25%. Most countries are out of seats and out of capacity. Here, international students make up around 3%, 750,000 of them. It could easily go to 1 million without any adverse effect on the Americans. And there'd be a positive effect, as we learned with the Fulbrighters at lunch and as we learned talking to your study abroad and international advisory programs. In a country like ours, only about 65–70% of Americans, we don't have passports. And most Americans who do have passports are over 60. And sometimes the only way that the American student gets to understand something about Brazil or Barcelona is to sit next to a student from that country. And that becomes the international experience and gateway for them. Earlier, Bill's team asked me if I'm so worried about how to get more Americans to study abroad, and you have a very large number, but most American campuses send very few students abroad, and the total number is less than 1% across all of U.S. higher education. I said maybe the first step ought to be that the chancellor or the provost says every freshman coming to this campus that is an American citizen needs to sign up in the first quarter to get a passport. With 65% of our citizens not having a passport, it's a darn good start. And you don't have to study abroad in the traditional ways that we all envisioned. If you have a passport, you'll find a way to use it, and you'll find a faculty member that will help you use it. And it might be for a short experience at first, because that's all you can afford, that's all the time you can take, especially if you're in an engineering program. But as we're learning, people in Germany build cars, people in China build tall buildings and bridges, and engineers can learn a lot even from a short exposure. And so for us, the paradigm is changing. It's not the junior year abroad. Almost nobody goes abroad for a year anymore. Only about 4% of the 250,000 Americans who study abroad do 2 semesters or 3 quarters. More and more people are not going in the junior year because there's the MCATs, there's the sports, there's getting ready for graduate school. And so get a passport in the first quarter of your freshman semester. Begin to make plans to use it sometime in the freshman, sophomore summer, the sophomore year. It doesn't have to be for a whole quarter, but get exposed and out into the world we share. And that would be the single most important step any public university could take to change the thing I most worry about, which is that our American students will increasingly be isolated in the world that we share. We also hear from your alumni that the specific experiences here make a difference. Recently, one of your alums was elected the vice president of the Rice Traders Association in Myanmar. It's the first election for that trade group they've had in 30 years. And one of your alumni won it. And we asked him what made you think you could run for a somewhat political office in the midst of the transition. He said, I learned confidence here. Another Humphrey Fellow from Brazil was made Director of Sustainability for his company in Brazil. And I thought it was just a perfect way of expressing what he gained. Permit me just to share a brief excerpt. He said, all the leadership seminars, all the courses, and all the information I got was priceless for me. And a Brazil Science Mobility student wrote to us, and I think you now have the largest cohort of Brazil Science Mobility students. I think you will have had close to 70 by the time the new group comes. Said, quote, my classes are thrilling. My professors are inspiring, and I am amazed at how much I have learned in a short time. That's what our great public universities and institutions do. Students learn, professors inspire, and alumni go on to do great things. Speaking of alumni, I did entitle this 9-page lecture From Mandalay to Memorial Hall, and I thought I would conclude by explaining why. I actually was in Myanmar 2 months ago. We visited Yangon, Naypyidaw, and Mandalay, taking a delegation of 10 U.S. higher ed institutions for the first time to that country as it opens. It was labeled an historic visit. I actually thought it was because it had been a closed country for 40 years. Middle of our trip, we stopped in Mandalay, divided into 2 groups, and my group went to the medical school. And the rector spoke to us. Reminded me of some of the best public leaders of public institutions that I've ever met in America. Meets the freshmen and their parents. Has a Facebook page with over 7,000 likes as we speak. Has faculty evaluated by students. And as he talked, I began to wonder if the country's been closed for so long, where did he get all of this? And so the formal proceedings ended, and he said, why don't you come to my office for a few minutes, we'll have some tea. And I asked him, how did you get what I would call these progressive public university ideas? And he took out from his cupboard an old, you know those old black page photograph albums, brown cover that says photographs, and opened it up and he said, this is my father. He was at UC Davis in 1950. Here were other Burmese with him. Here we were on the picnic lawn. You can imagine the old cars. And he said, Father told me what you did at Davis. Told me what it was like to be in class and challenge professors. And he said, I've never lost that dream. And everywhere we went afterwards in Myanmar, I would at the end say, where did you get that idea? Where did you hear about this. And it was a similar story. My uncle was a student at Cal Berkeley. My mentor was a Fulbright at Harvard in 1952. And all of them had the same message. They said, we've been closed for 30 years. This generation has missed it. My dream is that the next generation will not miss it. And that dream can't be achieved unless you keep your doors open, as I know you will. Now, there's one other thing we have in common with this great campus. You were founded in 1905, and that was the year that one of our founders, Elihu Root, became Secretary of State of the United States. He had a pretty bad run. It was a pretty dysfunctional world system. World power was not exactly solving world problems. And he became very concerned about the world he was at that time stewarding. He went on to pioneer arbitration treaties, which won him the Nobel Peace Prize, thinking that maybe if countries arbitrated their differences, they wouldn't fight about them. And then with another Peace Prize winner, he founded the Institute of International Education because he said if people studied in each other's countries, if they understood each other in the education space, they would make the world a less dangerous place for us all. And that's what we do, and that's what we do with your great university together. And it has been a genuine privilege to be here, even if I have to go back tomorrow. Thank you. And I would be happy to take questions.
Allan has certainly left us ample time. We have 15 minutes for questions, comments.
I could also start reading the 9-page lecture.
And I will post his talk on our webpage.
Please.
It's Chuck. Comment. Perhaps we want reassurance. You're in a sense, we're all converts and we all agree with you. But one thing, those of us who around town, those of us who have kids in high school or such, lots of grumbling right now. Last month or so, my kid didn't get into Berkeley, my kid didn't get into Davis. And you hear a lot of friends, teachers, if the kids get into high school, this oversimplification, probably an error that kids from California are getting in, they're letting in kids with deep pocketbooks overseas. I don't agree with that, but that is a public relations problem that I think is facing, that we all know, most of us know in this room. Do you have any reassurances, tips on that, or perspective on that? This perspective that we've made it harder to get in. There are all these horror stories. You have to have 4.4 to get into Davis, and it's in large part because of, simple part of this argument, because of the infusion of foreign students.
Well, first, the good news. I do a lot of outreach in Congress, and I really haven't heard that kind of argument in a very long time, and I do both sides of the aisle, from the Tea Party to the regular Republicans to the Democrats, and people get the need for keeping our doors open, for the value of international student presence on campus. Until recently, it was a little bit easier to engage on that debate because 3/4 of the international students that come to America are at the graduate level. And since Americans don't study math, science, chemistry, biology, physics, and we apparently need doctors and mathematicians and physicists and other things, it is a very welcome thing that we can draw upon the whole world. Last year, for the first time in our data, the undergraduate numbers were 50-50. And I'm thinking that next year we're going to see that increase because everybody else is out of capacity. Whether it's Brazil or China or Britain, they just don't have the capacity that we might. So this may become more of a problem as more undergraduates are here. I'm awestruck at the quality of students that I meet at public institutions. But many international students, they think of our East Coast and their West Coast, and they need to begin thinking about Nebraska, North Dakota, North Carolina. They need Indiana, Illinois are taking more and more students, and my hope is they'll get better distributed so that you're not under as much pressure as you could be because of your excellence from as many more international students as you're going to get. But we have to watch it. We think international students could be better distributed throughout America, and America would benefit immensely from having it.
What role do you think online education would have in the context of international education?
It was a terrific question. We were sort of talking about that earlier. And what role is distance learning and online, the MOOCs, what impact is it having? And I became president in 1998 and forecast that in the next year, what NYU was then doing, which it failed at doing, would take over the field. So none of us have seen in the international area an impact. I used to, when I'd make trips abroad, bring to ministers of education calculus or the biology course from the MIT Open Courseware, a whole set of discs, all the reading, all the lectures. Couldn't get one of them to accept it in their school systems. Well, we're not sure it's high quality, it's an American plot to take over the world. It was made by MIT, and other organizations where you've worked before have three-letter initials, and maybe it's connected. It hasn't taken off yet the way I thought it might. Where it really helps is the student that gets the passport in the freshman year, gets a brief experience abroad, then connects through Facebook, LinkedIn, some of that to the students they met or the professor they met. But I'm sure in the next couple of years, the MOOCs, the online learning, is going to change what is delivered and what people take. It will never replace the reasons that people write to us, like I quoted. What did you gain from being at Davis? It's the confidence, it's the actual experience of academic freedom. It's finding teachers that really teach and really inspire. You just don't get that online. So, but it could be a very useful supplement to what we're all trying to do globally. Please.
As a UC Davis graduate who graduated from my high school a year early and traveled in 14 European countries before I came to UC Davis, where I taught 4 classes as an undergrad, where I worked, where I attended, and where I lived, I very much appreciate your message, and I thank you. I have 3 questions you can answer at your own leisure. Where do you get your sense of hope and inspiration? Who were the strongest mentors in your life, and what's the best advice you received from them?
So I had no interest in doing anything international when I went to college or graduate school. My interest was running for Congress, and I loved state and local government. And I somehow got this scholarship to Harvard and made the mistake of buying my books. And I was broke. I'd learned only later that nobody buys all the books and nobody reads them. Needed a job, and I've been a gopher before, and it's okay. And my hero, James Q. Wilson, who taught in this system until he died, the world's expert on American state and local government, needed a gopher. And I went to his office and said, I'm here. And the secretary said, it's just been filled. No job available, but this other fellow needs somebody to help him write a book. And I said, what's the subject? And it was political development in developing countries or something like that. And I said, I really don't know anything about that. And she literally frog marched me into Samuel Huntington's office and said, this fellow is willing to work for food. And he hired me. He said, by the way, do you have a passport? Nope. You better get one because I'm going to take you around the world this summer and we're going to do a project for the State Department. And that really changed my life. So what I learned from that is we need to teach our students to be open to lots of opportunities. And I counsel so many who are so tied up. I don't know if I want to be a lawyer or a foreign service officer or a doctor, and I don't know if I want to work here or in this city or that city. And I keep trying to tell them, try everything, be open to everything, open up your options. You don't have to decide when you don't have the job. And then as I watched Sam's career, he focused on domestic issues, he focused on military issues, he focused on political development, he controversially focused on the clash of civilizations. I learned from him that the reason you got an education is to shift and be able to shift. When I left graduate school, I was probably one of America's leading experts on South Vietnam. There was only one problem with that expertise. In 1975, that country ceased to exist. And were it not for what I learned from my education and from this mentor, I probably would have been stuck in that rut. But what you get from education is the ability to do other things. And I was very impressed when I talked with Surbash about your graduation rates and employment rates. The other thing you should get from a great education is a great job. And it looks like your students are headed to do that. But it only happens if the faculty are engaged. So you have both a professor like Surbash, a Fulbright alum, and someone who is intimately involved in making the Career Center work. And public institutions do that, and great teachers do that. So thank you for your questions.
How much of the international engagement of the university emanates from the chancellor or the leadership, and are there special efforts to reach that level to change the dynamics?
I think increasingly more and more depends on your chancellor and your provost wanting to do this. Because we're reaching the end of that generation of the one-on-one MOUs. When I left Georgetown, I opened my desk drawer, and there were all the MOUs that I had signed. I think there were 180 of them. Maybe 24 were still active. And as I transitioned into this work, I realized that it's the institutional relationships that live beyond the singular visit from a delegation from China and meeting with people on campus. And if the faculty moves on, the relationship continues. So I think you need the chancellor, I think you need the provost, and I think you need your trustees. We do now an annual publication for trustees of higher ed institutions, what a trustee needs to know about international education. How does it benefit the local community? How does it benefit the students? Why is it in the institution's interest to have these partnerships? So I'm seeing a real transition from the one-to-one, professor-to-professor MOU to the institutional partnerships. And it's you also need the resources from the chancellor and the provost to make some of this happen. But the students and the faculty, I think, are very well served when institutional partnerships are created and they endure.
We have time for 2 more questions. Harold? Yes.
As you know, many American universities, including public ones, are establishing campuses abroad, particularly in the Middle East. China is an obvious go-to place for a lot of places. As you look at your crystal ball, what do you see as the future of that enterprise?
So the question is about branch campuses abroad, and is it a trend? I think no. There are about 200 branch campuses of institutions worldwide. About half are American, and a quarter of them are in the United Arab Emirates. We were part of the team that had advised Her Highness Sheikh Mosa of Qatar to have Education City. They now have Carnegie Mellon, Texas A&M, my beloved Georgetown, Northwestern, Virginia Commonwealth, HEC from France, Cornell. Weill was the second institution there, the medical school. I think that's very unlikely for other countries and other American institutions to be going abroad in branch campuses. It takes a huge degree of underwriting to make it risk-free to the host and the home institution. There are about 30 American universities abroad: Beirut, Cairo, Kyrgyzstan, Greece. I, for a while, thought we were going to see a lot more of them, but many of them got their start with big funding from USAID and or Ford Foundation. And without, again, the big funding that anchors it and starts it, it's going to be very difficult. There's an American University of Iraq in Sulaymaniyah, which got its start, again, from a big grant from AID. I wish we had more of those, and more of them accredited by the U.S. accrediting bodies. But I don't think we'll see 400 branch campuses abroad anytime soon. And some are having difficulty, and we'll probably see a contraction of that.
If you could talk about maybe either a few books or authors that really have influenced your thoughts and formed, who you are and what you believe.
Yikes. I'll just mention two. One is Graham Greene's Quiet American, a book about the French intervention and then America in Vietnam, partly because everything that's happening today I think I've seen before, and Graham Greene seems to have written about it. I like that book especially because when I was a young officer in Vietnam, my first night I found in the room I was assigned an old copy of The Quiet American, and I read it in the next couple of days and said, this is really rubbish. It's a whiny, complaining British author hoping that America would fail just as the French had failed. It took me about 20 years to realize that that was a very profound book and observation. And then the other thing that influenced me the most is the library that Samuel Huntington wrote, because, as I said, it showed that a great professor and a great education enables you to move from subject to subject, and that's the best thing we could teach our students. You only get that with academic freedom. You only get that with inspiring teachers. You don't get that through distance learning, and I think that's going to be the bedrock of our progress in the future. Thanks very much for your question. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
We invite you all now to join us for the reception on the patio. For those of you who have additional questions and a chance to express them, please approach Dr. Goodman and have a conversation as well with others in the audience, because there are many experts in this audience that I think learn a great deal from us. Once again, thank you all for coming, and please join us for the reception.
In addition, as a complement to these campus events, my office established the Provost Forum on the Public University and the Social Good. This focused scholarly series is aimed at furthering awareness and dialogue on this important topic within and beyond the university community. It's also aimed at exploring the potential to make UC Davis a center for the study of the role of the public university in contemporary society. This academic year, the series features 7 public presentations by experts in a variety of fields, plus associated events. The presentations are overseen by my office in cooperation with the university's Center for Regional Change. To learn more about these Provost Forums, I invite you to consult the Future of the University page on my website. There you'll find a complete calendar of the 7 lectures scheduled for 2012-13, information and supplementary materials for each event, and videos of past events. You'll also find my opening remarks for the inaugural forum held in October 2012, which addresses the task before us as we attempt properly to envision the public university for the 21st century. For making today's event possible, the following individuals and groups deserve thanks. First and foremost, Dr. Allan Goodman, who has traveled from New York City via San Francisco to be with us today. Next, our Oversight Committee for arranging this and the other forums for 2012-13 academic year. The committee's members are Martin Kenny, David Campbell, Jonathan London, Luis Eduardo Guarnizo, and Program Manager Alicia Tom.
Programs, over 250 corporate, government, and privately sponsored programs. UC Davis, as many of you know, is one of the only 18 universities that host the Humphrey program in the United States, and the only university in the state of California that hosts the Humphrey program. UC Davis also is first this year, tied among research universities as the top producer of U.S. Fulbright scholars in 2012 and 13. Another key activity, one we shouldn't overlook and is particularly important today, is the effort by IIE, starting in 1919, to rescue scholars threatened by war, by terrorism, by repression. They've rescued scholars beginning in 1919 from the former Soviet Union, Russia, from Spain during that civil war, during the Nazi occupation and rule in Germany, more recently in Iraq, and most recently in Syria. And today, under Dr. Keith Walkenpaugh's leadership as director of the Human Rights Institute here at Davis, we had a 2-hour panel session on some of the tragedies that are occurring in Syria, particularly the impacts it's having on their universities and their future direction in terms of human capital development. So a very important function that the IIE has played over that long period of time.
The co-sponsors with my office of today's event, University Outreach and International Programs, the Center for Regional Change, and the Community and Regional Development Program. Vice Provost of University Outreach and International Programs, Bill Lacey, for inviting Dr. Goodman to speak and for serving as today's moderator. And finally, to all of you for being here today. Your participation in the forums and your sharing the ideas presented in them with others is a key mechanism by which the series will help us identify and clarify issues facing public higher education and ultimately developing effective solutions. As I step away, I'll remind you that you're all invited to stay for the reception on the patio immediately following today's presentation. And now I yield the podium to Vice Provost Lacey.
Thank you, Ralph. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome my colleague and my friend, Dr. Allan Goodman, the 6th president of the International Institute for Education. And it's really a pleasure to have him join us today to give us the final lecture of this very important series on the public university and the social good. As you probably know, the Institute is the leading not-for-profit organization in the field of international educational exchange and development training. Among other endeavors, IIE administers the Fulbright program, the Humphrey program, and has sponsored numerous other
from a Brazilian model developed by the state of Sao Paulo. Today's forum promises to be an excellent follow-up to our last one, in the sense that Dr. Goodman too will provide an international perspective. His distinguished career as an academic leader uniquely qualifies him to do this. I can't do justice to his resume here, and Bill Lacey will speak more about Dr. Goodman's accomplishments in a moment, but I do want to note that in addition to his current position as president and CEO of the IIE, he has been executive dean of the School of Foreign Service and professor at Georgetown University, as well as a consultant to the Ford Foundation, the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation, the United States Information Agency, and IBM. The very difficult period surrounding November 18th, 2011 on our campus gave greater urgency to two questions that were already the subject of spirited dialogue and debate on the UC Davis campus. What should the University of California, or any public university, be in the 21st century? And what can it be? In response, the Office of the Chancellor and the Office of the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor quickly committed to facilitating an inclusive and productive dialogue on the future of the public university. As part of this commitment, the two offices have established a web page residing on my website in support of lectures, panels, forums, and other campus events designed by or offered for the benefit of the UC Davis community.
Once again, thank you all for coming to the last lecture meeting of the Provost Forum on the public university and the social good. Today we will be taking a closer look at that university system, its role on the institute for social good in an international context. And without further ado, I will turn the podium over to the Provost himself.
Thank you. And I actually think I will use the podium. So, good afternoon. I want to welcome you to the 6th event in the series, the Provost Forum on the Public University and the Social Good. We're extremely pleased to have as our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Allan Goodman, President and CEO of the Institute of International Education. He will speak on the topic, From Mandalay to Memorial Union, How Public Universities Keep Dreams Alive. As those of you who've been attending the Provost Forums this academic year know, we've had many insightful presentations on the public university in our own country. Topics receiving special emphasis have ranged from budgetary challenges to public universities' public service mission to the so-called corporatization of higher education and neoliberalism. Our last forum, featuring Professor Carlos Enrique de Brito Cruz, broadened our perspective in a crucial way by focusing on public universities in his home country of Brazil. Dr. Brito Cruz helped us to understand public higher education in California more deeply and inspired us to learn